I'm kind of interested in the notion. I think what we've really talked about here is sort of user education. You're an email user, you get something that's prompting you to click on something or open a file. But what about developer education? I haven't heard a whole lot about developer education in the mass media, but what are your thoughts? How important is it?
Well, I mean, you see a lot in the mass media about events that happen when there isn't developer training. I think we've just been talking about some of those. So, I mean, this is close to my heart because this is most of what I do, most of the courses I write, most of the speaking and training I do is around developer training. So I have a vested interest, but to my mind, when you look at the way these security breaches are happening, they are really, really, really heavily orientated towards flaws in software. So we're still seeing SQL injection, for example, being enormously prevalent in risks. We're seeing it particularly recently in a lot of the data breaches that have come out. There have been SQL injection flaws in popular forum software. And these are flaws that are being baked in by developers. They're writing code that's vulnerable in the first place. And what I've found is that very frequently developers are just not familiar with these patterns. They may be conscious that there is this thing called SQL injection, for example, but they're often not aware of how it's exploited, and they're often not aware of what the impact is when it goes wrong. And the other thing that's interesting with developer training is that this is it's about the most cost-effective thing you can do security-wise, because they get to use this investment over and over and over again. So you train developers and then they go and they build multiple software products. You get to impact them at a phase of the project where it's most effective to invest. We want to try and get security right as early on as possible in the life cycle. We don't want to wait until software is being tested or God forbid software goes live and now we don't actually have the right security controls in place. Things get really, really expensive when you realize that software is vulnerable. So, training sort of moves that risk much further forward in the project life cycle. It moves it to a place where you get to reinvest it, and it is an awful lot cheaper than a lot of the costs that we tend to incur with security, particularly when it comes to very expensive devices and products, which are still good things, but you don't want to have them as your sole point of failure as well. So I think developer training is absolutely essential, and as I said, clearly based on the headlines alone, we're not doing enough of it.
Actually, you make some really good points there. I think the developer education is really important. That, as you point out, most of the really big data breaches are ultimately associated with flaws in the platforms that are used to store that data, and there may have been a stepping stone along the way to perhaps get there. But ultimately, it comes down to the security of the platform that's housing that data, having sufficient scrutiny around the user interfaces to prevent things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, that sort of thing.
One thing I would throw into the mix, I think both of these are important. I would almost throw a third aspect in, which is admin training. Because all the work that you've done to secure your software can be undone with configuration mistakes and mishaps like that. Someone deploys a completely hardened box, but if you put it on the internet and the default password is still the default password, it doesn't really matter how much you've done to prevent SQL injection and cross-site scripting. People can still walk in and undo all of that.
Yep. So excellence in operations and making sure the platform itself is secured, patched, software patching as well. Absolutely.